Okay, now we can start. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a new lecture of the No Man's Land webinar series on pre-modern Islamic manuscripts. My name, for those already, most of you know by now if you've been following us, but for those who don't, is Bruno de Nicola, my name. I am the PI of this project funded by the FWF of the Austrian government and based at the Institute of Iranian Studies of the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Vienna. For those new to the webinar, just a quick reminder, we're going to have a talk by our invited guest speakers for 45 minutes, more or less. And then we will have questions and answers afterwards. You can ask questions in different ways. You can place your question in the chat or use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Or also you can raise your hand and I will allow you to come in and you can ask verbally your question. Today, we will be attending a very special lecture. On the one side, this is the first time in the 10th lecture we had so far that we're going to be presented by two contributors. That will be an interesting new development. But especially, I'm also very happy that this is the first time that we're going to be covering aspects of manuscript studies occurring in the Western part of the Islamic world. More specifically, we will be talking about collections that originated in Morocco in the late 16th century, but it is currently located at the Palacio del Escorial in Madrid, the Saadian Collection. The speakers today are Dr. M.Zouihal from the Agadir University in Morocco and Dr. M.Zouihal from the Collège de France. Both have been members of the ERC project Cycle, directed by François de Roche and coordinated by Núria de Castilla. The lecture of today is called Oriental Manuscripts in the Saadian Collection. Motia, Bashir, whenever you're ready, please start. Thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Bruno, for this invitation to participate in this second lecture in this year's webinar series, No Man's Land, dedicated to the study of Islamic manuscripts in pre-modern Iran and Central Asia. I would also like to thank Professor François de Roche and Professor Núria de Castilla for offering us to participate in this webinar with this talk about some specificities of Oriental manuscripts of the Saadian Collection held in the library of San Lorenzo de El Escorial. A topic that we have addressed in the framework of the European project RC 670628 So the information presented here are part of the results of the work carried out in the framework of this project about Saadian intellectual and cultural life, directed by Professor François de Roche, Collège de France, and coordinated by Professor Núria de Castilla, École Pratique d'Institut. The results of the work appear almost simultaneously with the webinar that brings us together today in the two-volume book entitled Les livres du Sultan, matériaux pour une histoire du livre et de la vie intellectuelle du Maroc saadien du XVIe siècle, edited by François de Roche, Núria de Castilla, and L.Tahali, Mémoire de l'Académie des inscriptions et belles-lettres, Paris 2022. Our talk will be divided into two parts. The first part, presented by Dr. L.Tahali, deals with the historical and material aspects of constitution of the Saadian library, named Al-Maktab al-Ilmiya or Al-Maktab al-Ali al-Ilmiya in official correspondence, the establishment by Ahmad al-Manṣūr in 1578-1603 of an efficient supply system between Egypt and Marrakesh to bringing Oriental manuscripts. Its protagonists and its functioning are also mentioned by L.Tahali here. The second part of the talk, the one that I present, focuses on the specificities of these Oriental books transported to Marrakesh under the reign of the Sultan. Both parts are use data from the paratexts of some of these manuscripts. Thank you, L.Tahali, for your presentation.
First of all, I would like to thank the organization, especially Mr. Bruno, for the opportunity they offered me to present a small part of a collective work, of which I am today only the spokesperson. As my dear colleague Mutia pointed out, this communication is the result of scientific work within the group, of which Professor François Desroches and Professor Nuria de Castilla were the leaders. Furthermore, I must point out that this is the first time that I am given a talk in English, which I do not often use orally, even though it is one of my research languages. Thus, I ask you to tolerate my pronunciation and my shortcomings. The constitution of a library of certain size in the age of the manuscripts book depended to a large extent on what was available on the market. Copying activity could have provided support, but it does not seem to have been very intense in the case of the Saadians, judging from the testimonies we have. If the owner of the library was a person of importance and substantial means, which was the case with Ahmad al-Manṣūr, he could also hope that another would dedicate a work he had just composed to him, or even start writing one for him and present him with a beautiful copy. However, this purchase of existing copies was the most effective way to build up a library worthy of the name within a reasonable time. On the stop, the Sultan could expect to obtain what he was looking for quite easily, since the largest proportion of the collection consists of manuscripts in Oriental script. It seems natural to begin by examining the conditions under which the Saadian sultans succeeded in acquiring these manuscripts, given that Oriental copies of literary works were already circulating in the Muslim West in general and in Morocco in particular, as several volumes of the collection show. Since Morocco's geographical location is at the far end of the Muslim world, the acquisition of books required networks to tap into the resource of important intellectual centers in the Near East. Contacts with Egypt were incessant, particularly because of the pilgrimage. Scholars could occasionally undertake longer regional stays, as shown in the manuscript 788, whose copyist and possessor, Muhammad bin Abdulaziz Sanhaji, had made a journey at the beginning of the 15th century that took him to Alexandria, Cairo, Jerusalem, Damascus, and of course, Mecca and Medina. The Saadians could not imitate these scholars, but they could rely on the services of their contemporary counterparts or of other Moroccans traveling to the East and on correspondents residing in these countries from whom they could seek help. The Rasail Saadiya, edited by Abdullah Ginnoun, includes about 10 letters that reflect the efforts deployed by the Saadians to set up networks to assist them in the purchases they wished to make in the Near East. Although this source does not allow for a precise chronology of the various stages reflected in the letters, Ahmad al-Manṣūr seems to have begun very early to establish links with local figures. Egypt was very clearly, and for various reasons, the region to which he turned, if only because of the annual linkage that the pilgrimage caravan, al-Hajj, provided. The presence of Malikite scholars on the spot may also have influenced his decision. Thus, we possess several letters addressed to Badr al-Din Muhammad bin Yahya al-Qarafi al-Misri al-Maliki 1601. One of these emphasizes membership of the same madhab when the Sultan asked him to issue an ijaza, quoted in Manahil al-Safa of Abu Faris Abdul Aziz al-Fashtali, Supreme Secretary of Ahmad al-Manṣūr. Books are naturally also mentioned in this letter, and the Sultan does not fail to request Badr al-Din al-Qarafi to send him a copy of his commentary on Khalil's Mukhtasar as soon as possible. He also asked him to kindly facilitate access to the books for those who are responsible for buying or copying them. We see the position of al-Qarafi. According to the Rasail Saadiya, exchanges had to be bilateral, and in other missive, Ahmad al-Manṣūr informed his correspondent that a series of books touching on Malikite doctrine were being prepared to be sent to him. Ahmad al-Manṣūr gives a bibliographical clarification relating to on the same Mukhtasar, which is a book of the Islamic law, that of Ibn Marzuq al-Hafid, to inform Badr al-Din al-Qarafi that it is a work which has not been completed. The Sultan also forged links with a figure in the intellectual world of Cairo, Zayn al-Abidin bin Muhammad al-Bakri al-Siddiqi, 1604, a member of a prominent family that was notably valuable in mystical circles. We say al-Waqf of al-Bakri for the benefit of his son, Waqf in this part. Ahmad al-Manṣūr addressed his congratulations to him on the occasion of his marriage, but also asked for an ijaza accompanying his request with hints of a fee, like the Moroccan cities of Fez or Marrakesh, where we can see from notes in the manuscripts that there were booksellers. The large cities of the Near East also had stores where amateurs could find manuscripts. Criers could also be assigned to sell them to interested customers. In order to exploit these possibilities, it was necessary to have an ally in the place. With Abd al-Rahman bin Aḥmad bin Ali al-Humaydi, 1595, the Sultan Ahmad al-Manṣūr seems to have made a strategically more effective choice. Al-Humaydi was a doctor, but above all, al-Iraq. Al-Muhibbi even specifies that he was Sheikh al-Iraq, leader of copyists and booksellers, which made him particularly valuable for the ends pursued by the Sultan. In a notebook sent to this book's professional, the Sultan listed the books he was looking for. Even so, he left his correspondent free to add other, while emphasizing that he would get remuneration for his efforts, 100 mitqal nodariya as currency. Ahmad al-Manṣūr ended with a recommendation. He preferred calligraphic copies of good quality. As pointed out above, it is difficult to order these letters chronologically to discern more precisely the evolution of Ahmad al-Manṣūr's position. A letter to the Ottoman governor of Egypt shows that he must have changed over time. In it, the Sultan acknowledged that an earlier strategy of entrusting the Hajj caravan, like the Hajj officials, with the responsibility of finding the requested books in Cairo had come up against the fact that these agents were not always able to achieve this objective, and the result was often poor. Drawing conclusions from this failure, the Sultan requested the support of the governor in favor of a certain Ahmad al-Wijani, who had come with the pilgrim caravan. He had entrusted him with the task of looking for books and purchasing them, pointing on the governor's support for this purpose. The interests of Ahmad al-Manṣūr and also of his sons Saadian and Abu Faris did not go unnoticed in Cairo, nor did the generosity that accompanied the constitution of the library. Egyptian actors also needed to know what directions the Sultan was taking, and the notebook sent to al-Humaydi would inform them of this. As a result, the taste for the works of Ibn Hisham al-Ansari al-Misri, 1360, from which 7 titles are preserved in the library, must have been so well known that it prompted an initiative that presents another aspect of the constitution of a princely library, the writing of a work dedicated to its owner, an Egyptian grammarian, Abu Bakr ibn Ismail al-Shanawani, seeking to get into the good graces of the Sultan, took the trouble to comment on one of Ibn Hisham's main works, أوضح المسالك إلى ألفية ابن مالك, known by the abbreviated title At-Tawdih. He began this commentary to present it to the library of al-Manṣūr and informed the ruler of this undertaking. Al-Manṣūr rewarded him even before he received the complete and final version of the works, and addressed a letter to the author in which he requested him to bring it to him promptly so that it could take its place among the books in his library. This textual information finds a natural complement in the collection. The manuscripts contain a number of clues, some of which lead us back to the information available to us through the Rasail Saadiya, for example. In other cases, it is data from the manuscripts that allow us to follow the history of the Saadian library. For example, at least 2 sets of marks could correspond to those purchase missions just discussed. We cannot identify those who wrote on the copies they had acquired their prices in Ottoman currency, but this tells us that the purchases had been made in the empire, probably in Cairo. Example of manuscripts sprinkled with marks of Oriental position. An Oriental and more specifically Egyptian actor, Yahya ibn Muhammad al-Mallah, is in this context one of those whose name comes up most often in the history of the collection. He was thus the last possessor of the manuscript 52, ملكه العبد الفقير يحيى بن محمد الملاح في سنة 986. A copy of the التذييل والتكميل في شرح كتاب التسهيل of أبي حيان, following a purchase from Sheikh Wali Din bin Yahya bin Sheikh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, as stated in the manuscripts 54. من الشيخ ملكه من الشيخ ولي الدين بن شيخ الإسلام. This may be a descendant of the great Egyptian scholar Zakaria bin Muhammad al-Ansari, whose name appears on several manuscripts in the collection as a possessor, manuscript 1205. The 5 volumes, Arab 52 to 57, were acquired in 1578, as stated on each of the volumes, a date which coincides with the date when Ahmad al-Manṣūr became Sultan of Morocco following the Battle of the Three Kings. Biographical sources relating to this period do not provide us with any precise information about Yahya bin Muhammad al-Mallah. Yet we can draw on the Khulasat al-Athar, a biographical dictionary of al-Muhibbi, where the latter mentions Abd al-Rahman bin Yahya bin Muhammad al-Mallah al-Hanafi al-Misri, 1634. Abd al-Rahman bin Yahya was the secretary of Egyptian scholar Zayn al-Abidin bin Muhammad al-Bakri al-Siddiq, who, as we have seen, is among the Egyptian contacts of Ahmad al-Manṣūr. Al-Muhibbi calls Abd al-Rahman bin Yahya a great scholar and ingenious poet. The best known text of his work is Qurrat al-Ayn fi Farah al-Zayn. It qualified him to be in the service of Zayn al-Abidin, the son of Muhammad bin Ali al-Bakri al-Siddiqi, whom he had succeeded as the leader of the scholars to the Ottoman governors of Egypt. Al-Muhibbi relates that Zayn al-Abidin was highly esteemed by the governors of Egypt, so much so that they treated him kindly and constantly sought to please him. Nothing seems to oppose the hypothesis that Abd al-Rahman bin Yahya bin Muhammad al-Mallah would be the son of the possessor, whose name we have noted in manuscripts of the Sharh al-Tasheel. Moreover, we consider that the intellectual and social stature of Abd al-Rahman's son was not the result of chance. It was indeed the result of his father's notoriety and the conditions he had secured for him in order to maintain the preeminence of his lineage. The relatively large collection of works belonging to Yahya bin Muhammad al-Mallah that is found integrated into the Sultanic library constitutes tangible evidence of his place in the intellectual community of Cairo in the second half of the 16th century. As a result, hypotheses that Yahya al-Mallah would have benefited for his part from the protection of his contemporary Muhammad bin Ali al-Bakri al-Siddiqi, who left his mark on the scientific and spiritual life of Egypt and even the Ottoman Empire in his time. The Sultan of Morocco, Ahmad al-Manṣūr, for his part, had sent him a letter seeking his invocation and obtaining his ijazah. Al-Bakri's response tends to show that the esteem was mutual. Abdullah Ginner mentioned this response. Also Al-Ifrani in his book Nuzhat al-Hadi. In view of this relationship, it seems that al-Bakri was responsible for the transmission in Morocco of the book under discussion, given the influence he exerted on a world to which Yahya bin Muhammad al-Mallah belonged, presumably. The 5 volumes just mentioned are not the only ones bearing the mark of Yahya bin Muhammad al-Mallah. In fact, there are no fewer than 15 other volumes in this case. One of them, 465, was also acquired by Yahya in 1578. although several of these volumes retain traces of their passage through Cairo and might even suggest that they are a batch of Egyptian copies. Arab 465 passed through Damascus, and Arab 1218, on the other hand, translated through Constantinople, where it was located around the beginning of the 16th century before passing to Yahya's possession. The copies cover relatively open chronological range, but the later ones are the most interesting for our purposes. Manuscript 450 was completed in 1563, and manuscripts 652 was completed in 1558. Everything would suggest that Ahmad al-Manṣūr brought into contact with Yahya al-Mallah through the intervention of al-Bakri, would have made this acquisition in the 1580s, when he was developing his intellectual project. Yahya al-Mallah's possession marks are reported on five copies that belonged before him to Abd al-Qadir bin Muhammad al-Ansari al-Jaziri. The latter attended the Bimaristan al-Manṣūri in Cairo with his father practicing medicine. This name most closely comes next to that of Yahya al-Mallah comes next to that of Yahya al-Mallah on the manuscripts that belonged to him. Al-Jaziri, a contemporary of Yahya al-Mallah, seems to have been the last possessor of these copies before their passage to this supplier. On the other hand, we find associated with the name of Yahya al-Mallah the name of another Dr. Shamsuddin Muhammad bin Badr al-Din Muhammad al-Qusuni, 1525, the author of Zad al-Masir fi Ilaj al-Bawasir. This nisba also appears on other copies with no Yahya al-Mallah connection, which proves that we are dealing with confirmed acquirers. I give the floor to my colleague Mutiya to give other elements of this Oriental aspect of the Saadian library.
Okay, I'll continue. In general, a great diversity can be observed in these manuscripts, not only on the codicological level, which will not be discussed here, but also with regard to the history of these Oriental copies transported to Morocco through the supply network mentioned by Dr. Tahali. It is important to mention that these Oriental manuscripts may be ancient copies that had belonged to possessors who used them for teaching and study, and who shared them with other readers whose names are sometimes given in different places, more precisely at the front side of the first leaf or in the certificate they contain. Oriental manuscripts of the Saadian collection may also be more recent manuscripts whose owners were prestigious collectors, rather military dignitaries. Otherwise, there are books produced generally in Egypt by Egyptian copyists at Al-Azhar, more precisely sent to Morocco. We have also in the Saadian collection manuscripts copied by professional copyists present at Sultanian Palace, the Iwan, surely walking at the Khizāna of al-Manṣūr. Concerning the ancient copy, the example that we see in this slide represents an interesting case because it is a copy dated 1136 of this famous Al-Risala al-Qushayriya, whose copyist was none other than the son of the author, Abu al-Mudaffar Abd al-Mun'im ibn Abd al-Karim ibn Hawazin al-Qushayri. This copy appears again 20 years later in the hands of another Iranian possessor in the Al-Qa'da 551, 1156, whose name is Abd al-Rashid. We can see in the middle of this text, Abd al-Rashid ibn Muhammad al-Nuqani. The copy may have been taken to Damascus by the copyist himself or by this second possessor, as many Khurasanian people were present in Damascus at the time. It will be the subject of study as shown by this certificate of edition written by the new owner, possessor, Al-Irbili. The master of the teaching was the Qadi of Damascus, Jamal al-Din ibn al-Haristani, as we read in the end of the certificate. We can read in the end, Sahihun Dali katabahu Abdul Samad ibn Muhammad ibn Abi al-Fadl al-Ansari. It is also the case of the manuscripts that we see here. Tafnid Kadib al-Muftari Fima Yunsabu ila al-Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. The book of Ibn Asakir, second half of the 12th century, will be extensively studied in different parts of Damascus. In 1186, the year it was copied under the authority of his son Al-Qasim ibn Ali, as we can observe below the certificate here. هذا صحيح وكتب القاسم ابن علي ابن الحسن ابن هبة الله الشافعي. It is clear that these copies endure over time and arrive until Saadian period because of their authenticity and the role that they have had to play as a source of knowledge for specialists of the subject they refer to and the supporter who shape their content. We can observe that through certificate data, as mentioned previously, and also through possession mark ex libris data which show the transfer of the books between generations. Tafnid Katib al-Muftari of Ibn Asakir illustrates this relatively well through the presence of possession data around the title of the volume, which show that the copy has long been in the hands of owners belonging to the same school, in this case, the Shafi'ite school. Indeed, Musa'id ibn Sari ibn Mas'ud, 14th-15th century, whose mark is in the upper left corner of the slide, became the possessor of the manuscript in 1395. Probably he is the first Egyptian possessor of the copy. Originally from Cairo, he settled in Damascus, then Aqraba, where he died on the date mentioned. Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad al-Samanudi, first half of the 15th century, whose the ex libris is located also in the left, below that of Musa'id ibn Sari, became certainly possessor of the copy in Cairo, where he was khatib at the madrasa of the Sultan and the mosque of Basta. Other possessors had this copy, but the two names we mentioned show on the one hand that the book remained in the hands of personality of the same school, and show on the other hand the movement of the manuscript towards Egypt, Cairo in particular, which will represent the main point of supply for the Saadian Sultan Aḥmad al-Manṣūr in the end of 16th century. This can still be seen in the following example on this slide, even if even if it must be stressed here that the question of obedience or membership is not exclusive here, but other links seem to innate the different possessors. Indeed, the first leaf or title page of this manuscript gives very interesting data about the possessors. The manuscript, 9th volume of the Chronicle of Sibt ibn al-Jawzi, Mir'at al-Zaman, we see here a mistake in the title, in the name of the author. It's not Abu al-Faraz ibn al-Jawzi, but Sibt ibn al-Jawzi, his grandson, has passed through the hand of several possessors. 3 of them were Hanafit, Ibrahim ibn Ahmad al-Hanafi and Shihab al-Din Ahmad al-Akfani, who sold the volume in 1339. However, it is likely that Akfani was related to the Mesopotamian scientist, originally from Sinjar, but living in Cairo, the author of a medical encyclopedia, Ibn al-Akfani. Later on, the manuscript becomes the property of Abdul Qadir ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Qadir al-Jaziri, Hanbalit, like the author Sibt ibn al-Jawzi, and illustrious Mesopotamian scientist, whose other manuscripts are among the Saadian collection after becoming part of Yahya ibn Muhammad al-Mallah, their last possessor in Egypt, as mentioned in the first part of the talk by Dr. L.Tahali. The Oriental collection of the Saadian dynasty included books from Mamluk and Ottoman Khizāna. The slide shown here refers to the Khizāna al-Sharifa al-Sulaymaniya, reference to Sulayman. This copy is dated October 1520. The information can be found in the colophon. The signature Imam Sultani, not appear here, is present in the beginning, refer to the responsible of its reception. No other information is included. However, it is possible to assume that it was a copy offered in the context of diplomatic contact between al-Manṣūr, Ahmad al-Manṣūr, and the Ottomans. We have also manuscripts that belong to dignitaries, governors, or others, as this examples show. I show here some examples. In the first example, we can see the name of Al-Janab al-Ali al-Amiri. The name is Al-Amiri al-Badri Biktimar al-Zardakash al-Mushid al-Sayfi al-Abu Bakri. The recipient and possessor of the copy is known as biographical sources, which indicated his interest in religious knowledge. Ibn Hajar, for example, Ad-Durar al-Kamina describes him in this words: min akabir al-umara fi dawlat al-Nasir Muhammad al-Mamluk. Died in Cairo, first half of the 14th century. In the second example, the first possessor, there are 2 possessors, 3 precisely. The first possessor is Maulana al-Maqar al-Ashraf al-Ali, al-Mawlawi al-Maliki, al-Makhdumi al-Sayfi, Tinma al-Muayyadi, Naib al-Thaghr al-Iskandari, governor of Alexandria. It could be the provincial governor dated in Damascus, 1463, whose name recalls that given by Sakhawi in Daw al-Lami, volume 3. The second mark gives the name of Ibrahim ibn Muhammad ibn Ali al-Qalqashandi, a scholar who bought the manuscript from another dignitary, Muhallaf al-Janab al-Ali, in August 1486. Some of these manuscripts, after having belonged to dignitaries, seems to be returning to ordinary possessors, as we see here. In this last part, I show information about copies produced for al-Manṣūr. Here we can distinguish three groups of manuscripts. The first one, in which would be placed copies produced by Oriental authors or copyists who dedicated them to al-Manṣūr. The example that appears here represented well this category because it is a book with a dedication. The dedication glorifies the name of the recipient, al-Manṣūr, and the poetry that follow extend this praise by linking it to the qualities of the Manṣūr, of the Sultan, and the subject of the title of this manuscript, al-Badir. The word al-Badir can also be linked with the name of the palace of al-Manṣūr. It should be noted, however, that this copyist, al-Humaydi, played an active role in the supply of al-Manṣūr library. The second example shows one colophon in which the name of the copyist is secondary. We have only the first name, Ismail. The information on personal use or name of other user, usually mentioned in the colophon by the copyist, is here absent. These are probably commercial books which were not originally intended for the Sultan, but which have become so in the light of circumstance and the urgency of books to which Saadian missives return in every correspondence with suppliers in Egypt. In this case, precisely, the subject of the book, Al-Barq al-Yamani fil Fath al-Uthmani, which is in line with Al-Barq al-Shami of Al-Imad al-Asbahani, 12th century, seems not without interest for the Saadian Sultan al-Manṣūr as it looks back on the conquest of Yemen by the Ottoman army. We can observe through the last example, the colophon of this copy done of Sultanian Palace, Marrakesh, by Rustam ibn Abdullah. It is a copy of al-Isharat al-Ilahiyya in theology of his author Najm al-Din al-Tufi, first half of 14th century. The operation of producing copies in Oriental handwriting became a local activity thanks to the presence in Marrakesh of copyists who mastered this handwriting. It should be noted that al-Manṣūr himself imitated Oriental handwriting, as we can read in al-Muntaqa al-Maqsūr of Ibn al-Qadi, his contemporary. The production in Oriental handwriting should be seen here as the outcome of this supply system established by al-Manṣūr. Indeed, supply system, spontaneous in the beginning, seems to be perfected as the reign of Ahmad al-Manṣūr progresses. The presence of foreign copies in the Iwan seems to be the final link in this organization that accompanied the reign of this Sultan. Thank you very much.
The first reality that the Sultanian library tangibly reveals to us is the dominance of the Eastern school in all its figures. This reality is obviously a tutelary and cannot be disputed under any condition, given the Oriental affiliation of the entire Arab Muslim knowledge. Faced with this remark, it should be said that although the Saadians largely proceeded to condition their dynasty by a propensity for autonomy and political emancipation, they leaned, on the other hand, towards continuity and fidelity to the East at the intellectual level. This was amply demonstrated by al-Manṣūr's correspondence with the scholars of Egypt. As a result, Egypt constituted for the Saadians a royal road that allowed them to access to the sources of scientific creation in all its aspects. In fact, it played a double role, sometimes as the producer of the authentic text that etched the Egyptian singularity in the history of the Arab sciences, Ibn al-Hajib, Ibn Hisham, al-Sayuti, and sometimes as a bridge for the circulation of Arab manuscripts between East and West. Still, we must admit that the scientific era of the time was promptly reflected in the Saadian investments in manuscript purchases. In other words, the Sultanic library traces a fine example of the significant interaction that could occur between a library and its historical and cultural environment. Thank you very much.